Previously on the historical Saul.
In our last video, we left off at Saul's driving out the Philistines in the border between Ephraim and Benjamin. And let me tell you, Saul didn't stop there.
Can you hear me, boss?
I'm sorry, Soups. Say again?
Saul's heading south. I repeat, Saul is heading south. Can anyone stop him? Can anyone stop him?
Can we get some cameras on Saul, please? He wasn't supposed to start his campaign until after the video.
You got it, boss.
Oh, good. Looks like he's taking a quick break at Telaim. Let's see if we can get an interview. I don't want this to happen again, Saul. If you don't want to do the job the way that we're supposed to, we can get someone else who will. Got it? So, King Saul, you just finished driving out the Philistines from the Central Hill Country. Can you explain what happened in the fourth quarter and what your Benjaminite coalition is up to now?
You got it, boss. But first, I just want to give hats off to the Philistines. I hate to say it, but they really put up a fight, even dug our heels back into Gibeah. But then that sneak attack by my golden son Jonathan really turned the battle around. Once he got the flank and took out the Michmash camp, it was smooth sailing, and your King Saul came through and did what Saul does best.
Awesome. Can you take us through that last push into the Ailon Pass, since we ran out of time on that last video?
Not a problem, Sparky. So, the Philistines thought they could retreat north, but I said, heck no. You're not touching my Ephraim highlands. So I did the old wraparound maneuver, routed them south back where they came from.
And now, can you confidently say that the Philistines are out of the hill country?
You can bet your booty they are, and if there are any remaining, hear my words. I'm coming.
Okay. So, what's your next move?
Well, after my epic victory at Michmash, I was able to lock up a trade deal with Ephraim, nearly tripled our numbers. So I think we got the forces to launch a southern campaign into the Negev and go as far as the Egyptian border.
You heard it here first. Now, let's check out what Saul's up to in the south. Back to you, Soups.
All right. 1 Samuel 15 states that Saul's campaign against the Amalekites came from an order from Yahweh.
And Samuel said to Saul, I am the one who Yahweh sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. Therefore, listen to Yahweh's command. Thus said Yahweh Tzebaot, I am exacting a penalty for what Amalek did to Israel, for the assault he made upon them on the road, on their way up from Egypt. Now go, smite Amalek. So, I'm not going to sit here and argue whether Saul actually thought that his campaign against the Amalekites was or wasn't his execution of Yahweh's will. But we all know how much politicians like to say the big G is on their side. What I'm trying to really get at is, regardless of Saul's piety, he would not have launched a southern campaign if it didn't have economic and political benefits. So, let's dig a little deeper and find out exactly what Saul was trying to do. A really interesting aspect of Saul's campaign is his recruitment of the Canaanites after he musters his troops at Telaim. Saul mustered the troops and enrolled them at Telaim, 200,000 men on foot and 10,000 men of Judah. Then Saul advanced as far as the city of Amalek and lay in wait in the wadi. Saul said to the Canaanites,
Come, withdraw at once from among the Amalekites, that I may not destroy you along with them, for you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they left Egypt.
So the Canaanites withdrew from among the Amalekites. The text betrays that the Canaanites were in some kind of alliance with the Amalekites, who were a classic enemy of the Israelites, yet we can't exactly pinpoint their geographical location. This is probably because they are depicted as nomadic raiders, so we only really hear of them when they're coming up from the desert and attacking Israelites. The Canaanites, on the other hand, historically have a good relationship with the Israelites, at least in the folklore. Apparently, the Israelites and Canaanites' cordial past is the reason that Saul gives them an opportunity to join them against the Amalekites. The Amalekites, however, are given no such mercy, as Samuel clearly states Saul must slaughter them all. Smite Amalek, and dedicate all that belongs to him. Spare no one, but kill from man to woman, lad to infant, from ox to sheep, and from camel to donkey. Now, I want to be clear. As much as theologians, religious scholars, or pastors try to sugarcoat this part of the story, it is obvious that Samuel is demanding complete extermination of the Amalekites. We know this because after Saul wins his campaign and brings back the Amalekite king, Samuel is furious.
You what?
Not a single living thing belonging to the Amalekites was to remain.
Whoa, I didn't even do that to the Hiawaiians.
Yeah, Samuel's demand is pretty terrible, and unfortunately, there is no but to this current story that makes it reconcilable. However, I can tell you this. Samuel's involvement in the Amalekite campaign is probably a slightly later addition to Saul's arc, a part of what scholars call the prophetic source. What that means is that the original strand of this story, which only featured Saul, never had this extermination part. We can say this confidently because it is Samuel who calls for the extermination, and it is Samuel who rebukes Saul when he doesn't exterminate the Amalekites.
Can you believe that? I chose not to exterminate an entire people, and somehow I'm the bad guy.
I really want to stress the point that Saul refuses extermination, because what this tells us is that Saul's true intention to campaign into the south wasn't simply to just slaughter Amalekites. What we will find is that Saul's story is overwritten a lot because of a certain king who succeeds him wants to make him look like a bad guy. But just like his Mi'kmaq battle, I'm sure you can guess what the real purpose of his campaign was.
Trade routes?
You betcha. So what the heck was coming out of the wilderness that Saul wanted to control so badly? It certainly wasn't food, but at this time, it may have been worth even more. Okay, I've been so excited to get to the Negev copper mines, because let me tell you, the stuff coming out of these mines in the last few years is, well, groundbreaking.
Oof, that hurt to listen to.
Yeah, you should keep your day job, boss.
Whatever, guys. So let's go back about a century. Just south of ancient Israel, in the southern and eastern Negev, two prolific copper mining sites have been uncovered. The Timna Valley mines, excavated by Benno Rothenberg in the 70s and currently re-excavated by Erez Ben Yosef. And also the Wadi Fanan mines, excavated by Thomas Levy's team beginning around 20 years ago. However, starting almost a century ago, prominent scholar Nelson Gluck had already argued that these Negevite areas must have held mines owned by King Solomon. Several decades later, Benno Rothenberg excavated the Timna Valley for the first time, finding substantial amounts of copper mining activity and redating the mining industry to the 14th to the 12th centuries BCE on account of the many Egyptian artifacts found at the so-called Hathor Shrine in Site 30. Rothenberg's reconstruction quickly put the idea of Solomon's mines to rest, and his dating pushed back the mining activities more than 300 years before Solomon's reign. Roughly 3 decades later, Erez Ben Yosef, an Israeli archaeologist, revisited Site 30, establishing a new date for copper activities. He writes, "Radiocarbon results from the 2009 excavations demonstrate that Site 30 is exclusively Iron Age, late 12th through 9th century BCE, and that the Egyptian finds from the Hathor Shrine cannot serve as a chronological anchor to all major sites in the valley." So Ben Yosef's date trumps Rothenberg's since it is an absolute chronology measured by radiocarbon evidence of the site's finds. The Egyptian artifacts then were nothing more than objects left at the site well after Egypt's reign there. Furthermore, Ben Yosef has established that Egypt had no control of the mines in this early Iron Age period, and that rather these copper sites were controlled by locals. So once again, we're hovering around Solomon's period. But what's more interesting for this video topic is that the 12th to 9th century also covers the entirety of King Saul's reign.
Those copper mines look quite shiny.
So let's picture this. While Saul was raising up a small kingdom in the Gibeah Hill Country, the Timna Valley just south of him was mining and smelting the largest copper industry in the entire Near East. In Site 34 alone, approximately 1,000 tons of slag mounds were found, in which Ben Yosef writes, "Thus, Site 34 represents a relatively narrow time window within the 5 centuries of substantial copper production at Timna, which corresponds to Site 30, Layer 2, and Kirban and Nachas, Stratum 4. Both also demonstrate a need for defense at this exact time. This time span can be reduced even further with radiocarbon samples from the charcoal. The charcoal data shows that Site 34 operated from the 11th to 9th century. Given too that only donkey and mule bones were found at the site,
Before camels were introduced,
The window may be reduced further from the 11th to the 10th centuries. And on top of that, these smelting workers at Site 34 were affluent and skilled guild members, with rich diets of meats, fish, and fruits, some of which were imported from the Mediterranean rather than the Red Sea just south of them. Suffice to say, these coppersmiths were elite members of society with strong connections to the Mediterranean coast.
Oh yeah, we're getting out the Araba with this one.
You said it, brother. I'm gonna buy a beachside house at Joppa.
Oh, nice.
Yep. Anytime now.
Not all at once, guys. Do you know anyone who owns a caravan?
Alright, so copper was booming bigger than ever before, and it was right on Saul's doorstep. And it's undoubtable that the Timna industry exported their copper to the coast. Moreover, the fact that copper is the dominant ore used to make bronze alloy, and that bronze weapons are a hot commodity for growing armies, Saul's military. You can bet your butt Saul had his eye on these lucrative networks that transferred copper from Timna. And probably to Saul's benefit, the Timna industry needed willing forces to protect their caravans. As we noted earlier, the text states that Saul allies with the Canaanites supposedly because of their good relations that solidified earlier. There is another element to the Canaanites, however, that would seem favorable for Saul to ally with them. First, there is a deep tradition in the Bible that the Canaanites are associated with metalsmithing. The first human born from procreation, Cain, is also the first to build a city. Later, in Genesis 4:22, Cain's ancestor, Tubal-Cain, is called the forger of all implements of copper and iron. Then in Judges 1:16, Moses' father-in-law Jethro is called a descendant of the Canaanites. And earlier in the wilderness narrative, Moses is said to have smithed a copper snake, allegedly the same snake that Hezekiah destroys centuries later. Likewise, at Site 30 in the Hathor shrine belonging to the central Timna Valley, a bronze snake was found in a cultic context. Secondly, these metalsmithing Canaanites come from the far south. Moses' Canaanite father-in-law is called the son of Esau, who represents the land of Edom, where the Timna Valley mines lay. For clarity on this, see Genesis 36, accompanied by this Bleckensop article. But I'll give you a brief excerpt. The original Edomite homeland was east of the Arava, but after the formation of the kingdom, Edom expanded to take in territory to the west, in the process dispossessing the aboriginal Horite, Hurrian-related inhabitants. These biblical data are confirmed by a probable reference to Shire, Matati Sheri, in the Amarna letters and in a topographical list of Ramses II in Amara West. Moreover, in Genesis 36, Amalek is considered a son of the land of Edom, biblical Esau, which again contains the region of the central Timna Valley. In fact, Timna, the name of Esau's son's concubine, gives birth to Amalek. So if we return to Saul's campaign, why are the Amalekites so far west in the wilderness of Shur, and why would Saul recruit Kenites who are further southeast to help fight them? I'll give you my shortened hypothesis first. What if the Canaanites are the copper producers who stay in the central Timna Valley, while the Amalekites are their caravan traders, raiders, or both, who wander from Egypt to the southern Negev? This is where Saul would come in. Saul, a promising Benjaminite king with an able son and newly acquired Ephraimite army, is still feeling hot from his fresh success in intercepting and redirecting the trade between Philistia, the hill country, and the Jordan Valley. But now, he's getting greedier. He thinks, hey, if I can skim wealth from these Israelite routes, why don't I try disrupting the trade routes that run through the southern Negev? So he begins at Telaim, where he musters not only his Benjaminites and Ephraimites, but also newcomers who are locals to the Negevite territory, Calebite Judahites. He goes further to make peace with the Canaanites, who at least have some part in the smithing operations at the central Timna Valley mines. They strike a deal that is probably along the lines of,
if I, Saul, go to the border of Egypt and beat up these Amalekites who are stealing your trade to the Egyptian coast, then may you return the favor and redirect your trade from the southern Philistine cities to the Phoenician states, where I can get a big cut.
Or the more likely option is Saul could have just been a lot meaner.
I'm taking your trade and there's nothing you can do about it, but I'll protect you guys in the long run because I don't know how to mine and smith copper.
Whatever actually happened, the reason for Saul to allow Canaanites to shift alliances is implicit, but quite shrewd nonetheless. Saul isn't trying to monopolize copper production, but rather copper exchange. First, mining and smithing on this kind of mass scale requires generations of planning and training to which Israel is not accustomed. Not to mention, living in the southern Negev is extremely hot and exhausting. Saul would be an idiot to try to take over the Timna mines simply because he didn't have the resources to run it properly. But where he lacks in smithing skill, he excels in warfare, and therefore he drives out the local raiders along the trade checkpoints with his own troops, and begins to monopolize the copper trade by redirecting wealth into his Gibeah polity. Saul is looking to get rich off the dirtiest of ways. He isn't providing a service, nor creating a product. He's imposing his will on local exchange networks with his ever-growing military. Shortly put, he's getting rich off others' hard work, and at least for the moment, he is very, very successful. After his successful campaign against the Amalekites, Samuel is told that Saul is making a stele for himself at Carmel, which is a Judean site of the Calebite clan of Nabal. This suggests that at the very least, Saul's control of Amalek encouraged the Calebite Judahites to submit to his kingship. Ultimately, Samuel's denouncement of Saul in the aftermath of his Amalekite campaign is total hogwash, at least on a political level. This is because while Samuel is berating Saul for his alleged ethical failure, the Benjaminite king had already taken control of the central hill country, parts of the Jordan Valley, parts of the Judahite Negev, and the entirety of the massive copper trade network from the Timna Valley mines to Egypt and the southern Philistine cities. So in regard to Samuel's denouncement, Saul is still kind of a jerk, but in a different way. As most kings are, Saul was probably pious, but also as most kings do, he got rich quick from exploiting locals of the territories in his proximity while persuading other locals to ally with him and preserve his newfound order in these areas. He's kind of a warlord. Unfortunately, to be the founder of a dynasty, you gotta get your hands dirty.
I thought this was supposed to be an apology for me.
Well, at least I cleared up the whole notion that Yahweh doesn't actually hate you, right?
I guess that's a plus.
Alright, I think we've reached our limit today, but don't you worry, the Historical Saul series will return very, very shortly. In my next video, where we take a deep dive into Saul's battle against the Philistines in the Valley of Elah.
Chugga chugga choo choo, the Saul train is just steaming up, boys.
That it is, Saul. That it is.